And I was really aware at that time that what was happening, the shift that was happening, is that Gaia was awakening, that the divine feminine was awakening on the planet again. And this was going to create a really big shift. And it's actually incredibly exciting because it's true. I mean, we're finding our voice, and there are options, there are really beautiful options for the way forward for us now. But gosh, how exciting, if you think for a minute that we're in this pivotal time, probably haven't been in this place for 12,000 years. And we can actually co-create with these new lights and energies that are with us.
Welcome to New Earth Podcast, where we dive into inspiring stories, profound wisdom, and insights from remarkable individuals who are driving the consciousness shift on our planet. If you're ready to elevate your awareness and well-being, you're in the right place. But before we dive into today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Together, we'll continue to explore the ideas and conversations that help you up-level your consciousness. Thank you so much for your support and your comments, and for being part of this journey. Hey everyone, today I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Ayn Cates Sullivan, a renowned award-winning author, speaker, and podcast host. She's written 23 books, including the celebrated Legends of the Grail series, and her literary works have earned her over 60 prestigious awards. She also hosts the popular podcast Wisdom of the Ages on the Superpower Network. And today we're going to dive into her fascinating stories, Celtic rituals, and her vision for evolving humanity and New Earth. And it's an absolute honor to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It already feels really magical. Can't wait to see what arises here. Thank you.
We did a little bit of an intention setting before the podcast today, and Merlin came in really strongly and said it's going to be a magical one. So I'm really curious and excited as well to see what unravels.
Well, I wonder how many people know that Merlin has a twin sister, and her name was Gaia, or is Gaia. She's quite present these days. So let's see what happens if we have some magical deities with us.
It's interesting that Gaia is, you're saying she's more present recently, as we're having this resurgence of the divine feminine and the feminine energy. Do you feel that that's a big part of her kind of coming through and wanting to be seen and known more?
So let's talk about the divine feminine for a minute, because it's been such a part of my journey for a while. I think it was 1987, and I first went to the Chalice Well, and I believe you're going this weekend. So that was the first time I really had a personal experience with the divine feminine, that it was she has many faces, many faces, many forms. But what happened in 2012 was that I was with some Mayan priests who said, you know the stories of the women of your people, you need to share them. And I realized at the time I was reluctant to talk about the divine feminine. And they said, well, of course, because she hasn't been allowed to be on the planet in 5,125 years. But we did a ritual. We did a ritual on the solstice of 2012, like many people around the globe. And I was really aware at that time that what was happening, the shift that was happening, is that Gaia was awakening, that the divine feminine was awakening on the planet again. And this was going to create a really big shift. And it's actually incredibly exciting because it's true. I mean, we're finding our voice, and there are options, there are really beautiful options for the way forward for us now. So we can go into that also. But gosh, how exciting, if you think for a minute that we're in this pivotal time, probably haven't been in this place for 12,000 years. And we can actually co-create with these new lights and energies that are with us. So yes, here we go.
It's an incredible journey, isn't it? I do a lot of work with people, encouraging them to find their voice, and speak of my own shyness and kind of guidance to start this podcast. And that's the thing. It's like we're moving out of the era of experts and moving into the era of being in a circle and sharing, and therefore everyone has value in what they're sharing. I had the wonderful Stuart Pearce on my last podcast talking about how to master your voice and really come into your own presence, because that's the thing. It's finding that inner note and that inner authenticity. And I'd love to delve into your stories, because my understanding of your stories is that they're very archetypal. They're really working with that, finding these characters within ourselves, or sometimes almost going back into perhaps past lives, or, you know, reclaiming these aspects of ourselves.
Well, let's talk about archetypes for a minute and what they are, because I think it's really important right now. And you know, from the perspective too of, I think there's a place for expertise in an area. So certain people just have a talent in a certain area. But my goodness, if there is a time for a circle and everyone bringing their particular gift to the circle, this is it. And I think, you know, women tend to know how to bring this together. And of course, I absolutely adore my son and my husband and all the men around me too. So it's actually just awakening the feminine energies in all of us. But so years ago, I was given an overseas research award to King's College London if I would go and gather folklore. They were like, if you would go gather folklore in the west coast of Ireland and do your doctorate on Lady Gregory, we'll give you a stipend. So I jumped into that, had no idea. And you know, I love that life is full of synchronicities, because I'm in Virginia right now. I had no idea that I was getting ready to walk into some serious magic. And I think it wasn't until I was sitting at Cool Park by the Turlough, the lake where Yeats wrote many of his famous poems, Wild Swans of Cool and Wandering Angus and so forth, that I realized that there are these really massive energies, and they have many names, but they're very real. And it can, when you tap into that field, it can make you feel very small. You know, because you go, wait a second, I've got like maybe 80, 100 years here. A lot of these archetypal energies are thousands and thousands of years old. When we learn how to work with them, when we understand the archetypal energy that we're working with, so sometimes I do this with astrology, or sometimes we just tune in to figure it out. We tend to live out our destiny in alignment with that archetype. So like, for instance, somebody has a Persephone archetype, they might feel drawn to the underworld, right? Where somebody else has maybe an Athena archetype, they might want to be a writer, might want to help civilization in some way. So, and we might have a plethora of archetypes, but that's what the feminine's so good at, right?
Multitasking.
Well, she's got so many faces. He was like the hero with
Yes.
1,000 faces. It's like, well, here the divine feminine shows up with her 108 with you know 8 billion faces. So this is where it's humbling and yet so exciting at the same time, because
And it's interesting you mentioning that, you know, the different faces, because a lot of that, you know, those archetypes have changed their faces through the ages, depending on, you know, what is going on in the world, you know, like the censoring in a way, you know. So I guess reclaiming the true archetype of each individual, is that something that you're interested in?
well, yeah, the Legends of the Grail series, the whole series is actually about each of the characters that come forward. They're all Celtic. It begins with Irish and then it moves into British deities. But they're all about retelling their names, because of course we know what happened you know, with the rise of Christianity. I absolutely love the Christ light. I'll just put that out there. Absolutely love the Christ light. But there have been times when that was used, when the church was used to, well, burn what, 8 million women at the stake, right? So we're not quite sure exactly how many people were destroyed. There's a big argument about that, but you know, people were women who had power you know, went through a period of being tortured and destroyed. So that was the Dark Ages. We moved through that. And so sometimes there's still some fear when you go back and you start working with the characters. That was one of the first things that happened to me. One of the first ones I worked with was Dendrain. And again, as Dendrain comes forward as I realized the first person to achieve the Holy Grail in Arthurian legend happens to be a woman, and no one ever writes about her. And so she wanted to tell her story. Ari wanted to tell her story. Danny wanted to tell her story. Aaron Rood wanted to tell her story. Blood Ivos wanted to say all this plethora. It started to just roll out, mostly in the beginning, coming through dreams and visions. And I was like, oh, they're waking up and they want to speak. This is happening now.
Getting
So it's very
goosebumps as you're saying that. I can feel it. Shivers down my spine.
Well, they can be very empowering. And I think the reason it's important is because as, let's say, Dendrain comes forward, we also look at the place. She sacrifices herself so that the men could also become Grail championship and the gateway to Saros. But what happens when we tap into like an archetypal energy like her is that the parts of us that are also maybe too sacrificial come forward. And so each one comes forward with a different, it's like puzzle pieces. And they're like, this is your Grail, this is your wholeness, and there's this part and this part and this part and this part, you know. So that's been really fun. And of course, the other thing that's really exciting is that they've now, over the years, become a tarot set that's coming out next year called the Celtic Elemental Tarot. And one way to work with that is actually to create your Grail and stand in it and just feel all the different wonderful forces and deities that are here to support us. Also the elementals, you know. Yeah.
I love that. That's so powerful. And do you feel with your work that there's this kind of going back into the past and making it relevant, making it almost like retelling the story for our current times, you know, taking that old wisdom?
Well, yeah, stories live on because when they're retold for each age. That's why we're bards. We retell it for the age in which we live. But there's another part to this too, and I think it's very important for the time in which we live now, that if you can separate people from their feminine self and from the earth and from the watery realms, if you can make that you know, illegal to worship in nature, for instance, if you can divide a person, they're really easy to enslave and conquer. So what happens when the feminine comes back and insists on being whole, is that the entire earth and everything living upon it springs back to life, right? So when the Lady of Sovereignty disappears, the earth becomes barren. And when she appears, the earth blossoms. So awakening that archetype within ourselves is so exciting because they're like, oh, yeah, we're in life, we're learn about health and learning about connecting to the trees and the stars and how the whole orchestra is singing.
Oh, that is incredible. And I know with these with your stories, you know, the mythology is very much alive in the land. Yeah, I had the wonderful Rory Duff on my podcast earlier in the year, and you know, these sacred sites, they hold that wisdom and hold that story. And my understanding is that when you're writing a book, you go to these sacred landscapes, and it's almost happens like a download.
That's very true. And Rory Duff is one of my favorite people on the planet. Yeah, he understands that the earth is alive and that it speaks. And so if we go to these, he calls them nodes, these sites where these nodes are reactive and very alive. Over here we tend to say vortexes, but when we come to these places where there's like a landscape grail, and that's what I ran into in Ireland without really understanding, because I was like 21, I think, wandering around, not really having been introduced to any of this. And I was, I was just was kind of an academic. And then all of a sudden, standing in some of these sacred sites, I had encounters with the fairy realm. And I had to, it was mind shattering in a way. I had to understand that there are many realms, and sometimes we get access to them. Um, and when we work with those realms, we want to be very, very respectful. But these are very life-affirming realms. So when I would go, and I still do this actually, I just finished Riddles of the Ancestors, but so I still go to these sites when I'm downloading a story or a novel or even nonfiction, because in those places, especially Britain, Britain has been a place that people, according to Catlin Matthews, a place where people have come to study magic for at least 10,000 years. So, you go to some of these sites, we know about Stonehenge and Avebury, but there's some other ones, Bryn Kellythe. There's some really ancient ones we can go to. And when we move, Rory Duff teaches this in his classes, but when we move from our persona, just the ordinary world, and we have to be able to function in the ordinary world, right? We have to be able to pay our bills and drive a car and do the things that we need to do. But when we're in a sacred place, we can move into expanded awareness. So when we move into this aware state, other realms and other deities become available. So we're opening other senses. Now, if you've never had this sort of sixth sense or 12 sense or 14 sense experience, you might think it's insanity. And I think it's one of the things that we're going to encounter in the years ahead, and actually even maybe the coming months, where people suddenly, just like the
Yeah.
experience I had, I'm like, oh, wait a second, I just saw a fairy. Because as the earth awakens, and definitely check out Sacred Network and the work Rory Duff is doing, because he's saying that these sacred sites are now inviting the higher mind to turn on, and at a certain point might force the higher mind to turn on. And of course, when this happens, this is hope for humanity. This is hope for all of us, because all of a sudden we're functioning from a different place. We realize that, oh my goodness, there are elementals that are taking care of the earth, and we are the stewards between that and the celestial realms and the stars, and we can be the conductors in this. And so we flip from the culture of death to the culture of life. Exciting, right?
It's incredibly exciting and amazing, and definitely more and more senses are coming on board. People on the podcast have been speaking about this, more and more of coming online. So you mentioned Riddles of the Ancestors, and you've written the book, but you haven't published it yet. Is that correct?
I did finish writing it this summer. It was a 3-year process, because it's basically a little bit like Nimue Freeing Merlin, which is my most successful novel out right now, which is about a woman in Britain who has to go back in time because she realized she was the one responsible for sealing Merlin in a tree, and the world's going to come to an end if she can't find him. So it actually winds up becoming a journey about finding her own magic and coming back, having known having had a romance with Merlin and understanding more about herself. So that book, it has done really well. And so this is the next in the series. It's called Riddles of the Ancestors. Similar theme, but Ganida becomes one of the main protagonists. And so they're actually, it's a little bit like Nimue, only they're many realms that they go into. Now, one thing that's really important for us to remember when we start working with archetypes and deities and refusing to be separated from our true self. So we're now starting to work with concentric rings. When we understand our ancestry, when we understand our stories and reclaim them, and of course, people don't want us to do that. There are definitely forces that don't want us to do this. But when we go and we insist, and we find our roots that go all the way to the core of the earth, right? We find ourselves at home on the planet. And the depressions, a lot of the physical ailments, a lot of these things just dissolve on their own. And we realize that the reason we felt uncomfortable and out of place is because we lost our roots somewhere. And so lighting our own hearth and retelling our own stories. And of course, all of us have different stories. And that's what's so fun about gathering around a circle and each person telling the story of their origin, their history. It might be the star system they're from. Who knows?
That's amazing. And that feels really relevant to me as a recently moved to Portugal 3 years ago. And that whole the importance for me, that in my work of the ancestral healing and connecting with the ancestors living overseas, and how do we find that sense of belonging? How do we find that rooting in a new country? Is that something that informed your work, living overseas with having that Celtic ancestry, but living in the States?
Yeah, the Celtic diaspora is an interesting journey because my ancestors left Scotland in 1668, my mom's side, 1668. My father's side were Welsh. I'm not quite sure where they came when they came, but they were Llewellyns. And they go back to Eleanor of Aquitaine and the French lineage. But when I was growing up, I was really fascinated by the stories. Now, these people, John was one of them, Guthrie, and some of the other ones are actually buried so we still have the farm, 1668, it was a land grant. And so what happens is some people that come, we were fleeing, in this case, religious persecution. So we were Protestant at a time where it wasn't okay to be Protestant. So the Bishop of Moray was beheaded in Edinburgh at the Kirk, and everybody got in the boat and fled. So what was really important, one of the things that was really important was freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and also, well, we're not going to get into it, but of course, for them, the right to protect themselves. So growing up, hearing these stories and remembering that it was important to storytell so that we remember our tribe, but also to to never let anyone silence us, to keep our freedom, to keep our education alive. So when I got the opportunity to go to I went to Scotland to visit my uncle when I was 12, which was amazing. He was running the Stills Gallery in Edinburgh. And then I fell in love. I was like, I have to go back. So I went, I was able to go back through university and wound up getting married. I married a Scot, and I wound up spending 11 years in the UK. And most of that time, I mean, almost every weekend, I would go to a different sacred site and just absorb. At first, I was finding my own stories, like, oh yes, well, we're related to the Knights of Bamburgh Castle. So I had to go to Bamburgh Castle, and we had to go to Fyvie Castle where the Guthries resided. It was also the home of Robert the Bruce. So our ancestry goes back to Robert the Bruce. So finding these stories, and at first, if so there's a way you probably find this too when you're doing your ancestral healing. First, it seems it's external and it's historical, and you go, oh, my DNA is linked to this. And then also did a series of far memories with a healer at the time. And so also, in that memory, it came back a lifetime as a Cathar, and other, and as an Essene and other lifetimes. So as those energies of people who were actually persecuted, as those energies started to return, there was a deep healing that took place and continues to take place. And that's part of Riddles of the Ancestors. So I hope when people read it, they'll go, gosh, what are the riddles of my ancestors, and can I solve them so I can fully arrive here on planet Earth? Yeah.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Where to start with that to uncover the riddles. Do you look at the family tree, or is it more intuitive? Because, for myself, I've never felt so at home as I did when I arrived in New Zealand, where I lived for a decade. I placed my feet on the soil of New Zealand, and it was quite unexplainable. I just knew I was home. And I'd love to. I haven't had the opportunity to go back to New Zealand for many years. I would love to explore what that is more now with my understanding, because at that time I didn't really understand, but there was this deep knowing. So is it important to people to be guided by things like family tree, or more that just exploratory, where am I guided to? Because you may well be guided to Egypt, where you've had lots of past lives, that actually that's what's coming through in this lifetime, even though it's not really in the ancestry of your current life at all.
I'm sure it's really individual. One thing I would say, if you're, because I'm a little bit of a hybrid. I've got the academic side, and then I've got the psychic side, the intuitive side. So
Amazing.
I really enjoy both, for different reasons. I guess with the academic side, I'm like, there's a little bit of proof. Oh yes, well actually there's some truth here. So then I can go a little deeper down the rabbit hole. So there's like two wings of a bird. But what I have found over the years, because this is what 40 years of doing far memories and whatever, is that really our past lives, we're quite often the people are our ancestry and our past lives have a pretty big overlap.
I found that, and sometimes when I'm doing ancestral healing, I'm like, is this an ancestor? Is this a past life? Oh, it's both. Right. Yeah, it's really common.
And the kids really enjoy it too. It's fun to learn history that way, because you go into a history class and you fall asleep, but if you realize that you were probably one of the soldiers in that battle, and and you can start to live into Battle of Culloden or whatever, you find yourself in that situation, then you see it with new eyes. Or you're running with Mary Magdalene to France, or right. There are lots of ways to see it. If you're going through ancestry, you want can be accurate. Well, at some point you're not going to be accurate, because all the records will take you to Adam and Eve, unless that's real. But I think at some point it becomes mythology. And who knows? There's definitely a place when you're doing that you start to go, well, I'm not really sure what reality is. But I do a lot of my work is called imaginosophy, because we imagine with Sophia, right? It's like we're in the wisdom field, and actually the imagination is probably more vast than reality as we know it.
into that quantum field, it's like we'll never really know, will we, whether I've done some quantum healing regression work, and we never really know if it's a past life or if we're imagining, and that archetype or that character is meant to show us up, to show something to us in our current time that's enabling us to move forward on our journey. But either way, when I've ever done this work, it just feels so incredibly powerful. And I feel like big part of it is trusting, believing it, because it's like, I want to believe in magic. I want to believe in miracles, because then I'm going to see more magic and miracles in my life.
Well, I think we're surrounded by magic and miracles. It's like, are we tapped into them? But to me, the imagination is definitely more powerful, because people will go, oh, well, that's just fantasy, or you're just imagining that. I'm like, well, actually, yeah, we're all imagining this.
Yeah.
It is the most powerful thing. And also, I think that when you include your body, and that was one of the things that in the past, with the conflicts that we've been in, people have not encouraged, our spiritual traditions haven't encouraged the inclusion of nature in the body, unless we go way back. And what happens is, when we're working with our imagination and we just stay in the head realm, well, we can fly off in all kinds of strange places.
Yes.
But when we include our heart and our body knows if it's real or not. I mean, it's just
like the goosebumps I was getting earlier. No, that is so true, and that is very much the journey that we're all on, that becoming embodied, we're awakening with Mother Earth, that is that journey. I'd love to go into this, as we're talking about imagination, and you're a visionary, you're a creative, and that role that you're playing in manifestation in a way through your stories, because a lot of the kind of media and films, they're kind of quite destructive, and in a way then that's what's being programmed, if we're watching this stuff. But you're bringing in that magic, that miracles, that awakening through your stories. And how powerful is that, to be bringing in the new earth?
Well, when you tell a story, it's very hard to do unless there's a drama. This is why we love Lord of the Rings, right? So, planet Earth usually has some battle between good and evil. I mean, when we raise up in frequency high enough, so we're hanging out more in a love frequency, we're more in a oneness, and there's not, we go into a non-dual state, and there's not really that much drama that goes on. But let's face it, just looking at the earth today, there's plenty of drama. So like for instance with Nimue, when I encountered Nimue as an archetypal being or a deity in St. Nectan's Glen in Cornwall, I had a major encounter with her on a waterfall. I was like, oh, downloaded the story and started. So when stories come through, I mean, this is where it's like, what's imagination and what's real? Like back to this, they just download. It's like, okay, I'll be writing, so I'm kind of basically taking notes as they told me about themselves. And I just love it. And I throw out any, when I'm writing, I never let my inner critic come in. I don't correct my spelling. I don't criticize anything. I don't question anybody. I just like bring in the download. So it just totally downloads. I'd leave it for a few weeks, then I'll go back and do some editorial work, but they're totally different processes. And I've found in order to be open to those realms, that has been really necessary. But anyway, back to Nimue. So I have this wonderful encounter with her. I'm like, oh, she's so beautiful, and she's the lover of Merlin, and I love this story. And then when I start doing my research after the download, I'm like, uh-oh, she's also considered a demon. So how are we going to come to terms with the fact that she's this beautiful light elf and she's a demon? And so as I was working with the stories, I saw a really clear image of her. And so in the story, she's supposed to be, after Merlin leaves, the counselor for Camelot. And we're in Arthurian legend right now. So we're walking in the realms of mythology. But what happens in some of the stories, as Lady of the Lake, she's beheaded in some instances by Balin, who's a man who doesn't know how to wield his sword correctly. So she knows this is going to happen. So talk about magic and miracle. If somebody's getting ready to behead you and you're very magical, you might just like make a double of yourself and let the double be beheaded, right? So, but in the book, it becomes problematic, because when she makes the double and the double's beheaded and puts her head back on, it freaks everyone out and they call her a demon.
I see. Amazing.
Right? So now
that's really interesting.
There are these two
also,
parts.
I mean, it's also interesting because we do live in a dualistic world.
Yep.
And we do need to do the shadow work. At the moment, it's not all the love and light. So I feel that battle between good and evil, it's like, and that also that knowing that we do all have these archetypes. It's not something out there, in the world. We do have this to conquer within ourselves as well. So that's also a very important piece, isn't it?
Well, and there's another part to it too, as we head into Samhain. As we develop our magical powers, we also get tested, because are we going to use them for completely selfish purposes, just to make ourselves more powerful, more glorious, more beautiful, wealthier, or whatever. And all those things are fine, but that's not really the reason that we have them. And so there's as you develop, you realize that you're developing because you're meant to be of service on the planet.
Yeah.
And so you become more and more of the oracle, and bringing through wisdom, ancient wisdom, for the time in which we live, so people can have the light in their heart and the hope and know, like, oh gosh, we're going through changes. Wonderful. Let's see what's going to happen next. So so we get tested, and I think a lot of my stories are about that. It's like, oh, you know, she's got this particular gift. How's she going to work with it? Right.
I love that. I love that you mentioned that we become more of the oracle. I hadn't really kind of seen that before, but you can see that happening as we're all kind of awakening. And I know that you've shared with me that you've downloaded your next book, and it is all about that kind of awakening of the earth. Are you able to share some, without kind of spoiler alerts? Are you able to?
I throw little tidbits without spoiling the whole book, just enough so you go, oh, I want to find out about that part. And actually, Nimwe's on Audible too. If people sometimes, oh, I can't read, but anybody can download Audible, so that it's actually really nice, and I love the woman who reads it. Anyway, that whole series you can download really easily. But okay, so the thing is, Riddles of the Ancestors really is about going back to the Oracle, because if you know, once you really start to sit with these energies and you go, yes, Britain was really this place of magic for 10,000 years. Okay, so what was it like back 12,000 years ago when we were, you know, and you're like, and we just have to imagine it. What was it like when we were fully aligned with life and we were completely attuned and we're just conducting with the universe? And so a lot of Riddles of the Ancestors is going back to figure that out. And of course, there are all sorts of battles too, because there are forces that don't want you to know. And so, you know, Ganeida, who has been around since the beginning of time, like Merlin, you know, one of the Merline, one of the star beings, is still challenged, even though she's an eternal being. She still has to grow. And so each of they're really 12 main characters, but each of them is forced to evolve in a way they weren't expecting and face something that they, you know, that's a surprise. But as they work through it, they become a you know, more powerful being. Once all these 12 come together, once the 12 come together, very much like an astrological wheel, they're able to stand in Hampstead Heath, by the way. So we're in London on the planetary Earth star, which Rory Duff's been talking a lot about. And you know, there's this planetary Earth star that's opened there, that where you can really, if you really tune in, you really sense, if you go there and you sense into the core of the Earth, or you just imagine being there, you can feel your highest destiny way. That's what it's for. It's to remind you of right? Your life purpose and mission. Why are you here? And what is it that you're bringing? Because we're going to pop off at some point. We're going to finish this incarnation and go elsewhere. So we might as well make the most of this. So, so what happens at the end, and I don't want to totally give it away, but there's an opportunity for Gaia to return, because in the book, most of the book, she's actually in it's either a spaceship or a cloud, depending how she's appearing and which century she's appearing, because we're shifting from ancient Greece to Rome to first century AD in Wales, and so there's a lot of time shifting going on. But the whole point is, like, as we recover our roots and as we heal and as we link to the core of the earth and the stars, then she can come in and blossom again. And so anyway, that book went off to the editor and that now it's like Return of Gaia. I'm working on that one now, because we do have to imagine it. Like, what is it to live in a society where we're not being killed off, where we're actually encouraged to live with life? What does that even look like?
We need to rewire to that. You know, there's a lot of conditioning that we need to let go of. You know, it's a whole journey. I actually did a whole healing series for about a year of creating New Earth. And it's really interesting because about 8 months in, I had this big realization, you know, because it was all about, you know, it was ending up going more backwards than you know, the visioning, manifesting side. And I thought, I'm going to have to start an ancestral healing group. So I ran a couple of ancestral healing groups for a while, because it's this sense of needing to go backwards, to reclaim, to revisit, to revision, because, you know, otherwise we are stuck in this wiring, this programming, this current conditioning that's quite limiting and problematic. So
It's true. You'll see it every time, every group I've run, just about, if when you encounter a light being, the next thing that comes up are trauma layers. Or if somebody really opens up to some powerful aspect of themselves, that's the next piece that comes up. So even if you've done all your personal healing for this lifetime, most of us have had multiple lifetimes, and Earth has been a pretty violent place for a long time. So all of those need to come up for healing, and they can all be healed. And there's a point too where you have to go, oh, look, another piece. Fabulous. So you can really let your blossoming happen. But yeah, a lot of people want to do a spiritual bypass and just step into the love, light, bliss, and
yeah, it's
harmony, and
not
it doesn't work
possible.
like that.
No,
No. Mm-mm.
it's definitely not possible.
No, no. And it can seem really scary and shocking. I remember when I was running a workshop in alignment with the Mayan priests on this when this was first happening, the awakening of the feminine. And we were envisioning this, like, well, what happens if the voice of the divine feminine returns to Earth, if we really are here, if we really start blossoming? And it was really funny because the sun set, and it was a big group. It was men and women. Every single man in the group fell asleep. It
Oh.
was like, okay. And then we didn't wake them up, but all the women came, and we lit a fire, and we spent all night just throwing in images of the negative, painful, all the ways that we've been twisted, and all the misperceptions and all the abuse and all of this. It was like the most negative stuff. And we didn't hold back. We just let it all come up and just made a whole cauldron of just this, and just let it bubble out. And by the time the sun rose, people were just like dancing in their light, and this is our work. And it's
Yeah,
not easy. I think people can become frightened of it, but it's not. I mean, fear is just, really fear is really just the ego, fear,
yeah,
persona. It's the small self. And so when we feel it, we go, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't walk down that path. You pay attention to it. But when we're really in our aware state, when we're really in our higher self, when we're in alignment with these higher deities, there's no fear.
yeah,
There's courage.
yeah,
There's courage to face whatever's there.
yeah.
And of course we're here to just keep blowing ourselves open to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. That's why we come to Earth.
It really is. That is so powerful. Blowing ourselves open. I don't know if we can rephrase it to make it more inviting, but
Well, I
but yeah,
think
ultimately that's
but
what
I
we're
think,
doing. Expansion, isn't it? That's where the
yeah,
expansion, but it's that paradox in a way. It is that facing the shadow to expand. So
maybe I see it as like when I say blowing ourselves open, I think of ourselves as like a starburst or a sun, where you're just like starting to move, out, out, out. And so these limiting, it's almost like I have experienced it at times of like a glass breaking, where it's just like it's outdated. Not that it would harm me, but it's just I've moved through that,
yes, yeah.
these limiting belief systems, these limiting barriers. And sometimes it has felt very raw.
Yeah, it can feel very painful. And
Yes,
I, a lot of people are going through that at these times. It's something that we speak to because it can be very uncomfortable at times.
it can. And that's why it's good to have your inner circle, your group of people. Yeah, I formed a group called the Intuitive Roundtable. And
Beautiful.
yeah, it's a group of six
And our
people.
beautiful friend Amber Sibley is in that, I believe, as well. I just wanted to thank Amber as well
Yeah.
for connecting us. She's such a beautiful soul. And yeah, I'll have her certainly on my podcast at some point in the future as well.
Amber Sibley is amazing. I met her quite a long time ago. I think it was in, gosh, 2000. Might have been, yeah, about 2000, 2001. I met her, and she came because my daughter wanted to be painted as a fairy, and we had a birthday party. We wound up painting everybody, which was great. We had unicorns walking around, people with leaves in their hair. Anyway, so our entire ranch just became, Lord of the Rings, and it was great. So when I went, I usually once or twice a year go questing in the UK because I have to keep developing the magic, right? And she's been my questing partner for a long time. She's someone like Rory, but very different too. Amber's very intuitive. Rory's more of a scientist. Amber is very intuitive,
She
and
really is.
she and I said Sibley at the time. I was like, you're really a Sybil, right? And that's your lineage, She goes, oh, so she has the ability, her body is like a tuning fork. And what's really fun about Amber is she has absolutely no academic background at all. It's just completely intuitive and completely sensitive, and she has such a sense of beauty. It's remarkable, and she draws on people. She helps people bring their archetype out. So we've done quite a bit of work with that. But she's also created a set of cards. So have her talk about these new cards she's created. She's lovely. But everybody on Intuitive Roundtable has created their own method of tuning in. And I've known most of them for 20 years and have been with all the back to the blowing up, but all the kind of awakenings that we've all been through and support there. It's really more of a birth, where you're just kind of moving into this next field. And if you're with other people who've already experienced that kind of awakening, it makes it a little bit easier. I don't know if easy is the right word, but you adjust a little more quickly when people go, oh yeah, it's okay. It's just this realm, or it's just this awareness. This is where you are. And so yeah, each of the people on the round table, almost all of them have either created their own deck of cards. Like I have the Celtic Elemental Tarot, also like a series of colors that I created a long time ago. And I'm also working on an Oracle deck now. But what we do when we're working with these cards, like, Amber with her cards too, is the whole point is not that you're just doing positive affirmations, which are great, but if you want to make it really powerful, you use these cards, or use your colors, or use your whatever you have in front of you, sticks, right? If you're going to do OM, and you open to the wisdom field. So you're intentionally moving past the limited self, and you're opening to this larger.
It's essential because that's where all information is available. It's like the library, we can access any information from there. So
and it's so true, and it's so beautiful. And of course the other thing is, how long can you handle it? Because there's a certain point where you're like, oh, I'm going crazy. So you want to close it back down again. So I think this is why, and part of what we're doing with Intuitive Roundtable is helping people develop those skill sets so that they can see the wisdom field for longer and longer periods of time. And, at a certain point, I'm assuming at a certain point, because I'm not there yet, but I'm assuming at a certain point, that's where you hang out. Yeah, all the time. If you're Gonida, right?
Well, and I mean, I think also we can tend to be tuned into different frequencies and stations, as well. Like, you're bringing through a lot of that Celtic wisdom, and I might be bringing through other stuff. And I think, autistic children, for example, sometimes they can be tuned into certain things, and they're actually bringing through,
Right.
like car knowledge since 1946. They know, if they're tuned into that radio station, as it were, they're able to then bring it all that knowledge through. It's quite incredible, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, they can be very interesting. I mean, and some of them are really in touch with different stars and different galaxies. Yeah, so they're bringing through wisdom that hasn't quite been integrated into humanity yet. So there's a whole learning curve we have there. When I was doing Riddles of the Ancestors, I've done a lot of Celtic work for a very long time. My first memories were actually more Cathar and Essene. But as it opened up, it really wanted to open up with this Celtic world. I think partially because you find so many powerful female figures in the
Amazing.
Catholic world that you don't find in Greek, Roman, Christianity. You don't find it in the Judeo-Christian so much either. So that although I love all of these beings, but in the like when I found like Gaia, who was the warrior goddess who trained Cuchulainn of Merhevna, who was the great hero of Ireland. He had to jump across a 20-foot ravine, and she was standing there with a dagger reading his future, waiting for him. And and she was known. She would either, if you weren't really going to be a hero, she'd just throw you in a ditch. And if you were supposed to be a hero, she would test you until you became that. So I was like, I really want to get to know Skaya.
Well, we definitely need these heroines for the birthing of the new earth, don't we? And the
Right?
rise of the feminine, divine feminine. Absolutely.
Well, you find them too, and if you think, well, who is she? Is she evil? It's like, no, she's very much Kali,
Yeah.
from the Hindu tradition, and something, a deity like, or a goddess like Kali is going to help you overcome your darkness.
Yeah.
And so they teach you to eat your demons, which is a whole practice right there of like not having any fear, and how you cast. Her whole thing was about how you cast a glamour, how you create what it is that you want around you. So they're wonderful and powerful. We all have access to them. So it's just some people, for some people that's their thing. Yeah.
There's so much to talk about, Anne. I'm gonna have to have you back because I feel like we're
Okay.
gonna talk for hours.
Oh yeah. Very easy.
Is there
Well,
anything you'd like to share before we finish up today?
oh goodness. Well, let's see. How do we wrap this up? I guess maybe we could do a show sometime on just what the new earth looks like, because I think in order to really awaken to new earth and stand in new earth and manifest new earth, which is our job, I think at this point, is just to clear the trauma pieces, clear the history, clear the past lives, clear all that stuff out of the way, so that we can stand fully in our power. This is in the Celtic world, right? The lady of sovereignty, the one who really is standing in her power. And this is true for everybody. Again, it's not a gender thing. It's very much just like claiming who you are, being authentic, being absolutely okay with being unique, and understand what your place and your purpose is. As you join the larger humanity. So the next phase, as far as I can see, is really about forming communities
Oh,
and
yes.
bringing your light in, and then really holding space for the light of others too, so that we learn how to work cohesively. It's a new skill set, so we're all working on that, but it's so great when we really can.
We speak about this all the time on New Earth podcast, coming
Yeah,
together. And it's very much part of that Aquarian age, being the facet of the diamond. We're all connected, but we're all shining it in a different way, in a different light.
absolutely. So that's it. So I just want, if I just leave the audience with just like, be willing to shine your light. Just let it turn on, just let it shine, and find your community, find your friends, find the people that support you, and be willing to let go of the people that don't. So it's a wonderful time, and yeah, let's do it together. And you can check out my website if you want, or if you're interested in my books or what
Yeah, I will
intuitive
put all your links
or
in the
that.
description, so
Okay,
people can
good.
find you for sure. So
Yeah. Yeah,
thank you
because
so much.
that's what we're doing too. We both are building community and inviting people in and saying, because I know there's a lot going on. So like join in and play. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Imagine.
Yeah. Hit the
Dream.
subscribe button and connect in with all these wonderful New Earth visionaries that are coming on the podcast. So
Yeah, thank
thank you
you.
so much, Anne. This has been such a beautiful conversation. And thank you so much for everyone for listening today. Bye for now.